Now, you might think this is a children's book. It could be. But here is one adult who has benefited greatly from having read it. It's short, it's sweet, it's imaginative, and it takes you to special places. Now, I want to read part of the introduction because this is something that people have some misconceptions about, and I would like to give you the gift of an education. This particular section in the introduction is titled, "What is Yiddish anyway?" Remember, in the title, Yiddish Tales for Modern Times. Yiddish, a culture of resilience. When people think of Yiddish, what usually comes to mind is an old world Jewish language that today is used mostly to be funny. Humor actually is one of the more conspicuous elements of Yiddish that have passed from old Europe into American culture. Part of the explanation is that to most American ears, Yiddish sounds funny. Yiddish words like klatz, fatz, putz, shmoo, schmaltz, schmuck, chutzpah, tchotchke, bubkies, glitch, schlep, nosh, fetch, kvitch, ketch are in English dictionaries and oftentimes find their way into jokes. Yiddish sometimes also offers a way of describing actions with a twist. It's one thing to have to talk with someone, but something else to schmooze them. Even though in the original Yiddish, schmooze just means having a chat. Yiddish was brought to America during the immense wave of immigration that took place from the 1880s to the 1920s, when over 2 million Eastern European Jews entered the United States. Now, many came from cities and towns where they had been peddlers, merchants, and trade people. Escaping persecution, they were pursuing a new start in America and settling in urban centers like New York City's Lower East Side, where many ended up leaving their trades and working in emerging industries, like the garment industry. Most of these Yiddish-speaking Jews did not have the time or means to go back to school. Instead, learning English on the street. And as they did, they incorporated the untranslatable parts of Yiddish into their adopted language, creating new meanings that had not existed before. These Yiddish words were picked up by other English speakers, enabling them to describe aspects of city life that did not yet have their own expressions. Together with the beginnings of the Great Migration, when over 1 million African Americans moved from the rural South to urban centers and introduced language that became a dominant part of American English, the immigration of Yiddish speakers influenced the language in ways that have remained to today. The result was an urban English inflected with Eastern European Jewish life, picking up its humor, but also its gravitas, since life in the old world with its pogroms and poverty drove not just the need to immigrate, but also the appetite for humor. Life in America, with its factories, sweatshops, and tenements, was not necessarily easier, but at least it offered hope for greater prosperity and social acceptance. As Jewish immigrants integrated into modern city life, they also left behind their traditional lifestyles, making Yiddish seem like a language from the past. This shift was similar to adaptation processes in many immigrant communities. But Lower East Side Yiddish was no more a language of the past than the Chinese of Chinatown or the Italian of Little Italy. Compared with those languages, actually, Yiddish was quite young, having begun to develop only in the late medieval times. Yiddish had its roots among the Jews of Southern Europe, who, speaking Old Italian and French, moved northward and settled along the major rivers of German lands. Their religious language, incorporating Hebrew and Aramaic texts, was fused with Middle High German, which they wrote out in Hebrew letters. In the late Middle Ages, persecution and expulsion pushed Jews further east into Slavic lands, and Yiddish began to be filled with Slavic words and grammar, while continuing to be written in the Hebrew alphabet. Well, soon developed into a language unlike any that had ever existed, a Semitic Germano-Slavic tongue that traced 1,000 years of Jewish life in Europe. This history and culture were wrapped in the bundle of a unique language, alive in its people who brought it along with them when they immigrated to America. And just as Hebrew, German, and Slavic words had made their way into Yiddish, Yiddish words now made their way into English. This may be partly because Yiddish and English share Germanic roots. Now, I've cut several sections here, which if you get this book, you can reread it, but it goes into even more detail. Shalom Aleichem was never forgotten, and neither was the humor. Now, I'm going to add something. This is me, not the author of the book. In addition to humor, he looked at social ills. Not the least was the usury that was seen by young girls being taken from families and in South America and ending up in disastrous situations in the trade for human flesh. But he not only believed in humor, he believed in societal truth. Now I'm going back to the book. And by the way, we may even be doing something really interesting, which I'm not able to tell you about, but you'll have to listen in to find out more about it that could be happening in the not too distant future. So be sure you keep up to date with Story and Song. Now, back to the book. As they became established in American society, Jewish cultural producers recreated images of the past, recasting Shalom Aleichem's story about Tevye, the dairyman, his now beloved village character, into the musical Fiddler on the Roof. Now, some saw this as the victory of Yiddish culture in America. Others saw it as defeat. The struggle for better social standing had created a disconnect from what life in Eastern Europe had been like. The poverty that had led to Jewish immigration, the persecution suffered by earlier generations, and the increase of anti-Semitism in the period before World War II. All these were largely eclipsed by the aim to achieve prosperity, accompanied by a romanticizing nostalgia. The grittier aspects of life in Eastern Europe were lost and with them some of the values and lessons that had been passed down through the generations. These morals in their story are both noble and practical. They deal with the powers we don't always know we have, and prepare us for all kinds of circumstances, helping us think about unexpected situations and reminding us that this world, no matter how difficult or scary, is our own. The stories help us examine our behavior and that of others while repeatedly showing that dialogue, tolerance, and compassion are our best tools when dealing with conflict. Oh, they may not always be funny in the way we expect of Yiddish tales, but they embody the strength that Yiddish showed throughout the 20th century. These tales, carefully collected and translated, appear in English for the first time. Their authors, some writing while still in Europe and others after arriving in America, conveyed an impressive array of Jewish powers that have stood the test of time. By portraying the images and values of a traditional life that was being upended, these authors created entry points into the past. Oh, not only for Jewish children of the time, but for all future readers. The world reflected in their stories is not always simple, but its manifold inhabitants are never altogether discouraged. Theirs is a land where happiness comes with tears, and where even tears are happy. Now, enough about the book. Let's get to the book. Can you see why I'm so enthused about this one? An Autumn Tale by Leon Elb. Near the river grew trees, and on the trees grew leaves. The spring had colored the leaves green, and this is how they stayed all summer. But autumn didn't like the green of the leaves, and when it arrived, it started to paint them, some yellow, some red. And then the wild winds came and tore the leaves off the trees and whipped them to the ground, and also made them dance and spin like crazy. Ooh, howled the wild winds, driving the leaves off the trees, down from the trees. And the leaves pleaded with the wild wind. Why are you taking us off the trees? We leaves make shade, and people come to rest and cool themselves off in our shade. The winds kept howling. It's getting cold, and people don't need shade anymore. They want to warm up now, not cool off. Ooh, down from the trees. The leaves pleaded again. Oh, but have pity on the trees. They'll be bare and naked without a single leaf to cover them. And what will they do in the cold? The wild winds hollowed, "Ooh, Uncle Snow is coming soon, and he'll cover the trees with a white blanket, and they won't be cold. Ooh, down from the trees." No amount of pleading, helped the leaves. And they had to come down off the trees one by one. One leaf, a yellow one, called out to another leaf, a red one. Do you know what, brother leaf? Why should we fall onto the ground and be cast off who knows where, or get trampled by human feet, or horses' hooves, or worse still, turn into dirt and mud? Since we're near a river, let's fall into the river, where no one will trample us with their feet. The river's clean and smooth, and we'll swim along. We'll swim and swim until we come to green land, where it's warm and green, and perhaps we'll become green again. The red leaf said to the yellow leaf, right, let's do it. They both landed on the river, and when they landed, the river didn't ripple the way it does when kids throw pebbles or wood chips. That was because the leaves were very light, almost as light as feathers. The river felt only a caress on its back. Oh, perhaps just a tickle, because it wriggled like someone who's been tickled, and said in its silvery voice, oh, the leaves liked that. The yellow one called out to the red one, oh, it's great on the river, delightful, even better than on a tree. The red leaf said to the yellow leaf, yes, it's just a little wet. The yellow leaf said, oh, never mind that. We don't have to be afraid of water. Do you remember how the rain would often soak us on the tree? Talking this way, the two leaves floated farther and farther until the wind came and started to drive them back toward the bank from which they had just escaped. So the leaves began to tremble, and the river itself trembled, because the river too trembles from the wind. And the closer the leaves came to the bank, the more they shivered, because they did not want to go back to the ground and lie around in the autumn sludge. But soon the wind came from the other side, and the two winds began to fight over the two leaves. The first wind chased the two leaves toward one bank. The other wind chased them toward the other bank. So the two leaves never reached either side and continued floating in the middle of the river. Two winds fought and fought over the two leaves until they grew bored with the game and flew away, each to its own cave, and the river became calm and still again. The leaves continued to float as they had intended. They floated for a day, or two, no, 3 and 4, and Greenland was still nowhere to be seen. So they floated on and on until the river flowed into a bigger river, and then they swam together with the bigger river until it began to flow toward the sea. When the two leaves saw the vast sea with its frightening waves, which reached all the way up to the sky, they became very scared. The red leaf called out to the yellow leaf, "Oh, let's go back, brother, because the sea will tear us apart. See how it roars and rages and it swells." The yellow leaf said, "Ah, right, let's go back. I see now that it's a very long way to Greenland, and we'll never get there." So the two leaves swam back, and they swam, and they swam, and they swam, until they returned to dry land, where it was autumn, and where the wild winds blew. But just then, a little girl standing on the riverbank saw the two leaves as they floated along. The two leaves looked very beautiful floating on the river, and the little girl, oh, she liked them very much. "What beautiful leaves," said the little girl. "I'd love to have them." A wind heard this and gave a strong blow, driving the two leaves to the bank where she could reach them. The little girl brought them home and thought about what she should do with them. She thought and thought until she remembered, she had a cousin in Greenland. So she said to herself, "I'll send her these two leaves, the yellow one and the red one, so she can see what our land of winds and autumn does to green leaves." Now, Mommy told me that in Greenland, everything is green, eternally green. And my cousin doesn't see leaves like these here. So the little girl wrote a letter to her cousin in Greenland and enclosed the two leaves in the letter, the yellow one and the red one. The letter flew to Greenland over rivers and over seas, and when it arrived, it brought with it the two leaves, the yellow one and the red one. The little girl in Greenland opened the letter, saw the two leaves, and she called to her mother, "Look, Mama, what kind of leaves grow in autumn land?" But her mother explained to her that the leaves hadn't grown this way. This was how they fell. The little girl in Greenland took the two leaves from autumn land and put them in a book as a keepsake. And the two leaves were pleased that at least they weren't lying around on the ground. This was translated by Lena Watson. Oh, I love this. The Moon and the Little Boy by Leon L. One night, taking a lonely stroll around the sky, the moon all at once grew sad. It thought, why don't I wake up one of the boys or girls? I'll have someone to play with and I'll feel better. The moon peeked into every window. Here it saw a boy sleeping, and there a girl sleeping. Oh, but they were sleeping so soundly that there really was no way to wake them. The moon tried to tickle this boy and that girl with a ray of light. And could only get them to smile in their sleep. They slept so peacefully and so beautifully that they were even a delight to watch. The moon grew sadder and sadder as it strolled All alone in the night, in such a big, wide world, it thought, how good the sun must have it. It's happy. It has people to play with all day long. All the children are on the street, and the sun plays with them. In the evening, the sun leaves to go to sleep, and the children too go to sleep. When I appear, the children are already in bed, and I have no one to play with. And when the children waken up, I have to go to bed already. Oh, it's no fun being a moon and staying awake all night when everyone is asleep, and sleeping all day while everyone is awake. The moon moved on and peeked into all the windows and tried its luck just in case somewhere there was a boy or girl who wasn't sleeping. Or maybe somewhere there was a boy or girl it could waken, and then it would have someone to play with. But again, it had no luck. All the children slept deeply, and it couldn't wake them up. The moon begged the children to get up and play with it. In return, it would give them belts of silver light rays that would be even more beautiful than the sun's belts of gold. It begged and it begged, the children sleeping tight, children unaware. No one wants to wake. No one seems to care. When the moon saw that its begging wasn't helping because the children slept so deeply and couldn't hear anything, it tickled them again. Maybe one of the children wouldn't be able to bear it and would wake up anyway. It tickled one boy with its rays, and it tickled his eyes for so long that he really couldn't bear it, and he squeezed his eyes tight. He squeezed and squinted for so long that he woke up and opened his eyes. The boy looked around and wanted to know who had tickled him. He looked, couldn't find anyone. Mama and Papa were sleeping, and no one else was in the room. The moon stood there, peeking into the window, and choking with laughter. The boy noticed the moon and asked, "Was it you who tickled me?" The moon answered, "Oh, of course it was. Can't you see that everyone's sleeping and I'm the only one awake?" The boy asked, "Why did you tickle me?" The moon answered, "Because I wanted you to get up and play with me. Because I'm bored being alone all night." The boy said, "Oh, fine, I'll play with you." He began to play with the moon. From her sleep, his mother heard that he was no longer sleeping, and she got up to ask her son, "Why aren't you asleep?" "Why aren't you in bed?" The boy answered, The moon." And he pointed at the window. The mother glanced at the window and saw the moon, a full and smiling moon. "No," she said, "the moon won't let you sleep. Oh, I'll show it." The mother walked behind the bed, pulled down the thick window curtains. The moon couldn't peek in anymore, and the room was so dark that you couldn't see a thing. At first, the boy refused to accept that the moon had been taken away from him, and he tossed and he turned in his bed unhappily for a long time. In the end, he fell back asleep. The moon left his window, embarrassed, and went to another window, and there it saw another boy. Now that boy happened not to be asleep, and neither was his mother. The boy's mother was sitting next to him. She caressed him and spoke to him with such gentle words that it was pleasant to listen to her. The moon peeked into the window, and just as it peeked in, the mother said, "Oh, look, my dear. Oh, it's the moon." The moon wondered why the boy's mother wasn't shooing it away from the window as the other boy's mother had done. Oh, on the contrary, pointing to the moon, this boy's mother said to him, "Look, dear, what a beautiful moon. See how it's looking at us and smiling. Can you see the little man in the moon? Can you see the nose, the mouth, oh, and the eyes?" The moon was astonished, oh, and happy that the boy's mother praised it. But suddenly he heard the boy groan. The mother asked, "Where does it hurt, my dear? Is your head still hurting?" The boy nodded ever so slightly, with difficulty, and said, "Yes." The moon understood that the boy was sick. It took pity on him and inched its face closer to the window. It caressed the boy with its rays, and he began to feel better and smiled. You know, the mother smiled too. "See, my dear," she said to him, "the moon is playing with you. Play with it, my dear. Play, and you will feel better." The moon tried even harder to caress the sick boy with its rays, and the mother too caressed him. For a while, the boy was more cheerful and happy. The moon laughed, and he laughed, and this way they played together all night long. At dawn, the moon parted with the boy and went to bed. The boy fell asleep too and slept well into the day. He got up, and his head no longer hurt. He was healthy again and asked his mother for food. She gave him food, and he ate everything. He sat down on the floor and played with his toys. At night, the moon returned to play with the boy, but he was already asleep, and it didn't want to disturb him. Let him sleep, the moon thought. The poor thing didn't sleep last night. He wasn't well. Let him sleep tonight. The moon hid behind a cloud so that it wouldn't disturb the boy's sleep. He woke up once, and the moon emerged for a short while with its kind and sweet smile. The boy smiled too and fell back asleep. The moon moved away from the window and hid again. behind a cloud. Now that was translated by Sandra Kiristicue. I'm probably mispronouncing that, but it's close. And finally, a short one. I really would like to just sit in front of this computer and just read on to you until we finish the whole book, but I'll let you finish reading it when you pick it up at Story and Song. The Little Boy with the Samovar by Jacob Reifspender. There once lived a ruler who waged war against so many nations, aiming to take their lands, that he started running out of rifles for his soldiers. There was not even enough brass or lead in the land to make bullets. The ruler began worrying as the other nations banded together and prepared to move on his land, and he wasn't one to surrender. He delivered a decree to his people, stating that in 3 days' time, they had all had to turn in any lead, copper, or brass metalware that could be found in their homes. And out of fear, everyone brought their metalware on their own to the places where it was being collected. Among the poor people lived a quiet and graceful little boy with blonde hair and blue eyes that were unusually lovely and intelligent. He was a curious boy who wanted to know everything in the world. He would look at each thing for a long time and think, where does that stream end up? What do those clouds way up high float toward? How do birds build their nests? How do flowers grow in the fields? And how is bread made? The bread that I eat each and every day. Ooh, he also liked eavesdropping on adult conversations, and so none of them could stand him. But worst of all were his strange questions. Why do some children walk around ragged and barefoot in the cold, while other children get to wear fancy coats and pants? What about the pretty dolls, toy horses, and booklets that filled the shop? Who are they for if poor children who long for them so dearly can never have them? Why are some people poor and some people rich? Wouldn't it be better if everyone were equal? Oh, endless questions. This little boy had a lovely small toy brass samovar, artfully decorated and with silk ribbons, and it was made of brass, and fringed paper streamers, which his parents had bought him as a present for his 5th birthday. That was already 2 years ago. The boy was now 7 years old, but the samovar was as good as new. It stood by the window on a special little table and shone in the sun like gold. So often did the little boy clean and polish it. It was his favorite toy of all the beautiful things he had. He loved imagining how his friends would come over and the samovar would boil and steam, and he would pour tea for each of them from his own little samovar into his own little cups, and they would all drink and enjoy, feeling very grown up. This is how the little boy played with his samovar and took care of it as if it were the apple of his eye. While the copper and brass metalware was being collected from all the houses throughout the land, the little boy listened in silence and grief to the grown-up conversations about how the metalware would be used. He walked around quietly with tears in his eyes and an ache in his heart. He thought about his papa, who'd gone off to be killed in the war. He'd kissed the little boy and left, never to return. What for? Thought the sorrowful boy. Had he ever harmed anyone? Oh, he was such a good papa. The morning when his mother gathered all the metalware in the house and prepared to take it away, she cast a glance at the samovar, but was overcome with pity for her child. She knew only too well that what the samovar meant to him. How unhappy she would make him if she took it away. But neither could she leave it there, because if she were found out later to have it, she'd be severely punished. The ruler was a hot-tempered person, and his guards had not a single glimmer of mercy in their hearts. So she reached out her hand to take the samovar, but the little boy threw himself onto the toy, clasped it tight with both hands, and cried out beside himself, "No, no, 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 I won't let you take my samovar. I won't let you." And he stamped his feet, threw himself around as if in a fit. His mother took pity on her only child and left the samovar in his hands. At least hide it so that it won't be found, she entreated him. The little boy hid his precious samovar in a good, safe place, but he'd take it out from time to time whenever he was overcome with the desire to play with it. One day, the city guards went from house to house to see whether any metalware had not been turned in. They entered the little boy's house unexpectedly, right when he was playing with his brass samovar next to the window. "Hey, you bad little boy," they roared. "Playing with brass, are you? You'd better stick to playing with the streamers, and we'll put the samovar to better use. Now, hand it over, quick." The little boy flung his arms around the samovar, clutched it with extraordinary strength. He pleaded with the angry guards, "Oh, have pity on me. Don't take away my samovar." "You can play with something else," yelled the guards. "I'd just as well play with nothing at all," cried the little boy. "But I won't give up the samovar. I know exactly what you do with it." And the boy burst into such wails that even the guards were moved by his tears. "But there's nothing to be done, little boy," they said, stroking his hair. "We're powerless. Our ruler has decreed that everyone in the land must give up all their copper and brass. So, take me to the ruler," the little boy blurted out. "I'll ask him to stop ordering you to take away my samovar." The guards smiled, and, for curiosity's sake, took him to their officer. The officer laughed when he heard the little boy's request. He sent the boy to his own superior, and so it went until the little boy was at last given an audience with the ruler himself. The ruler had heard about the matter that the little boy had come to discuss. He addressed the boy with a smile. "What good is the samovar to you, little boy? I will decree that you shall receive other toys instead, much prettier toys than your samovar." "I don't need any toys to play with," the little boy answered. I can do without." "So then, why do you refuse to give up the samovar?" the interested ruler asked. The little boy burst into tears and in a choked voice cried out, "Because I don't want my samovar to be used to make bullets that will kill someone else's papa, the way my papa was killed." Now, and he wept even more bitterly. The little boy's words sent chills down the ruler's spine. He bent his head and pondered. Then he lifted the child onto his lap and kissed his head warmly. "You dear, wise little boy. No, your samovar will never be taken away." The ending was as happy as could be. Thanks to the little boy's words, which had touched the ruler so deeply, he issued a decree that very day, ordering all metalware to be returned to its rightful owners. It was no longer needed, because the ruler had realized at last that too much blood had been spilled, and that there could finally be an end to all more. Oh, so many more wonderful stories in here. Please go find this book. It's waiting for a home. Your home. I'll see you on Wednesday with some poetry.